prepaid education savings program, where you pay for future education at today's prices. It's a safe, secure way to give them a debt-free start, or get back at least what you put in, often more, if they choose a different path. Because you can't predict the future, but you sure can prepare for it.
Escanaba reporter Lily Simmons on WZMQ 19 News.
Tracking your representatives in Lansing, only on 19 News.
This is a special presentation from WZMQ 19. Marquette at 175. Now, here's Jim Koski.
Hey everyone. I don't know if you're aware of this, but this is a big year for the city of Marquette. It's celebrating its Terquasco Centennial, its 175th birthday. It was on July 6, 1849, that Amos Harlow and members of the Marquette Forge and Iron Company came ashore to what we now call Lower Harbor, were greeted by some native leaders, including Charlie Gobogum, and set about to set up a village. That village, Wooster, came into being in September of 1849, and since then, Marquette has been going strong. We're celebrating Marquette's Terquasco Centennial by telling 3 stories tonight about how the city came to be. But for that first story, we'll need to head a few blocks that way. So to find out the story of how Marquette became Marquette, we're here at Founders Landing, where the city actually began, and we're joined by famed maritime historian and author of 30 books, Fred Stonehouse. Now, Fred, unlike most of the communities in Marquette County, Marquette is not built around an iron mine. It's built around something else, right?
Well, that's an interesting way to look at it, but you're absolutely correct, because the only reason Marquette exists was because of the iron mines in the county that could feed the world, quite literally, with a steady stream of red iron ore. And so much of that came right out through the port of Marquette. During the American Civil War, for example, nearly 60% of all of the ore used by the Union Army to produce the steel, to produce the weapons, etc., to win the battle of logistics, came right out of Marquette County, came right out of this port. But throughout the entire Civil War, the USS Michigan was stationed in Marquette to protect the ore trade. That was really the critical thing it performed during 4 years of war.
Now, what is it exactly about this harbor that lends itself to become a shipping port?
Well, of course, the proximity, as we noted, to the iron mines themselves. The fact that it's really a southbound harbor, in other words, you do have good protection from weather. The ability to build the docks that were necessary to support the bulk structure and the bulk movement of iron ore quickly and efficiently. This was a shipper's port when this came in. And we shouldn't forget about the natural features that were here that could be capitalized on by the builders of Marquette to be able to make it an efficient purveyor of iron ore product and get it to the mills as quickly and as efficiently as they could.
And we should also probably point out, too, that when Amos Harlow came here in 1849 and bought the land from the U.S. government, he not only bought what is now Lower Harbor, but he also purchased the land around what is Upper Harbor as well. Right?
Well, that's often forgotten about. You know, we are a single port with 2 harbors. The Lower Harbor down, that's the bulk of the city where we're standing today, and then the Upper Harbor, 2.5 miles north of the city, which was developed much later. Back about 1900, I believe, is when the first real structures went in up there. But that today remains as the principal shipping port, not only for Marquette, but for really all of the bulk ore that's coming out of the Great Lakes. At one point, there were 3 docks operating simultaneously for all of the ore product going out of the port of Marquette. And over time, of course, those became inefficient and largely were taken over by larger structures like the DSS and A dock. That still remains, though abandoned, still standing in the city of Marquette, and serves a fascinating and critical purpose for the city. It's a windbreak. It has become a vertical breakwater for all of the strong winds coming out of the south and southeast, and even the dead east wind will also be partially protecting the harbor in Marquette.
They stopped shipping iron ore out of Lower Harbor in Marquette in 1971, and that, over the next 20 years, radically changed the way that Marquette looked at this formerly industrial area. What are some of the changes that happened during those 25 or 30 years?
Well, that's one way of looking at it. I think a different way of looking at it, an alternative view, is to say what really was the keystone that changed the harbor in Marquette and to a large extent changed the city and the city in terms of how it thinks about itself and what its future plans are and operations might be, was when we reconverted the old coal yard to being Matson Park. When that unsightly dump of coal finally went away, and when the city fathers realized that the potential was here for making this into this wonderful park on the waterfront that would be of value to all of the citizens in Marquette, then everything changed. And then you saw other things happening too. You saw the bike path go in. And once those bike paths began to become used, then all of a sudden things changed too. And Marquette as a city looked at recreation differently. It looked at bicycles differently and how they were used. But all of that occurred from that step number one: fix the coal pile, clean that mess up, and then just stand back and watch the wonderful changes occur. So that's my alternative view on it to what you're suggesting.
And it was part of the change that downtown Marquette, Lower Harbor, has undergone over the past.
Lower Harbor is nothing like it was 20 years ago. It was nothing like it was 5 years ago. And we're standing right now at the foot of two disused shipping docks. If we look very carefully, we'll see the original piling construction of the dock, but we'll see that the dock has been repurposed for walking, for recreation. One of them people can be fishing off of now. There's a nice little spot at the end of the south dock if somebody wants to hold a little music concert.
Mm-hmm. It's astounding how much this area of Marquette has changed in the past 75 years, and I often wonder how the original city founders would look upon what we've done with it in that almost 2 centuries since.
In a way, I want to say I think they'd all be spitting in their graves because it's so radically different. On the other hand, these were people that had foresight and energy and could really, I think, see the future of what they were doing. So I think they'd all be quite happy with what's occurred.
It's certainly true. Fred Stonehouse, who is a nationally renowned maritime historian and author of 30 books, thanks for your unique perspective on how this has changed over the past 175 years. Coming up next, we'll hear the story of the peoples who lived in the area long before the Europeans showed up, when we're back on Marquette at 175.
John's Auto has been voted the #1 dealer to buy pre-owned vehicle for longer than I've been alive. If you're looking for a vehicle, or if you're looking for someone to help with your current car, or if you need to get yours looking like new again, come see us at John's Auto Sales and Service, Marquette.
Marquette is celebrating its 175th birthday, and things have changed. From a major shipping port that helped win the Civil War, transformed into today's beautiful scenery and treasured quality of life. Join Jim Koski for Marquette at 175. Discover history when Native peoples lived here 12,000 years ago. Marquette at 175. A TV19 special brought to you by NMU. Christmas Day at 6 p.m. only on WZMQ TV19.
Yes, we're on thin ice. And everything is going up in smoke. Still, some are adding fuel to the fire, while the rest of us see the troubled waters rising. Our planet is under the weather. But when the going gets tough, the tough get, well, you know. Because in the heat of this moment, we're not about to lose our cool. Love it or lose it.
I'm Gail King with CBS Mornings. We're here for you in the Upper Peninsula. This is now home for CBS WZMQ 19.
Is your parents' car sounding funny? Do you hear any clunks, rattles, squeaks, or leaks? Tell them to call John's Auto Service Department for fast, friendly, and affordable service. Come see us at John's Auto Sales and Service, Marquette.
Welcome back to Marquette at 175.
One of the stories that we want to tell during Marquette's birthday celebration is that of the peoples who were here before the Europeans showed up. And we have two individuals to join us tonight to share that story. The first is Jim Paquette, who is a Métis advocational archaeologist. And Jim, you have found evidence that Native peoples were here how long ago?
Well, people have lived here in the Marquette area a lot longer than people think. We actually go back right to the end of the last ice age. When the ice receded, there were people there and people here. And so we have direct evidence that people have been living here in the Marquette area for the last 12,000 years.
Amazing. And what kind of evidence have you dug up?
Well, primarily what we're looking for is, the stone tools and the things that they've left behind, because that's what they did leave behind. And you can date a lot of these earlier sites based primarily on what they call, the primary evidence, diagnostic artifacts, and that would be the spear points. And so we've been able to find spear points that date back to, 12, 11,000, 10,000 years old. And of course, we found things that date right up until the coming of the Europeans. So people have we've always been here.
Exactly. What have you been able to infer from the discoveries that you made of how Native peoples in this area lived?
Well, and that's a great question. One of the things to realize is that you're talking 12,000 years of occupation. You're talking, that's a long time, and so things change, the environment changes, how people adapted to that environment certainly changed, cultures change, populations change. A lot of things change, just like they do today, from decade to decade, and imagine, century to century. So there was vast differences between the very first people that lived here in small groups who were very nomadic, to when the Anishinaabe people were living here, as a more recent, prior to the Europeans coming here, who lived more, in these areas and in more family groups and so on, that spent most of the year here and then moved around back and forth. But early on, they were moving back and forth from Wisconsin areas, what we've been able to figure out, up here to the UP and back and forth, probably chasing caribou herds.
And what difference did you notice once the European explorers and the European missionaries showed up in the 1600s? Did you find a difference?
Yeah, you're obviously going to see a difference, because people are going to adapt to the new people coming here, particularly to the trade items and other things that are happening. And as the two cultures, met, things changed. Now, early on, the two cultures that met were the French and the Native peoples that lived here, say, in the Marquette area. Had been the Anishinaabe, early Ojibwa people, and they actually hit it off pretty well. There was pretty good relationships between, not necessarily the French government, but between the French that were here. Those were the traders, and those people intermarried. That's why myself, I am Métis. I am a descendant of early voyageurs and Anishinaabe women. So it's and that's very typical of what you're going to see here, particularly in the Marquette area and along the southern lakeshore of Lake Superior. You saw a lot of that interaction occurring that went back, and so things changed obviously because the Native peoples that are living here, they adapted to the new people coming here with their new new technology, new things, and so on. And then, of course, as time moved on, a lot of things were forced upon them. That forced changes. But early on, it was just more of a gradual change and an acceptance of these early French people. But that changed when the British came here, and then, of course, when the Americans came here, there was some big changes that occurred among the native cultures here.
Now, our second expert to let us know about the natives who were here before the Europeans is Dr. Martin Reinhardt, who is a retired professor of Native American Studies at Northern Michigan University. And Dr. Reinhardt, as Jim Paquette had mentioned, there were clusters of Native groups around the area. And specifically, there were a lot of Native settlements in the immediate Marquette area, weren't there?
That's true, Jim. And miigwech for taking the initiative to have this segment be part of this very important look back over history in this local area. In particular, there were 6 native villages that kind of, if you go from east to west, think about the Chocolate River out in Harvey, or what we now know as Harvey, over to Presque Isle.
And what was life like? What do we know of life, what life was like in those settlements?
Jim, it was paradise. It was our center of the universe, literally. I mean, this is the place that we called home with a capital H. And so that, when we talk about intact Anishinaabe culture, And then we think about the food relationships, or those spirit beings we call food, the plants and animals, our cosmological family, our language was intact. It literally was paradise.
And this picture that we're looking behind us was actually one of those 6 villages. And would this be the typical site that you would see at a native village?
Well, you know, this is an interesting photo because it shows the transition era, right? When European cultural customs and traditions were being adapted by Anishinaabe people. This is one of the earliest photos of a wigwam that we know of that exists. Photography itself didn't exist until just before that. So, yeah, you know, this one happens to be at Magadabi Nayashi, or what we know as Lighthouse Point today. And you can see in the photo that there's a lot of Anishinaabe tradition. The wigwam structure itself, you know, the use of birch bark for the covering. But you can also see that people are wearing the transition clothing. There's a gun in the foreground. There's a smokestack coming out of the wigwam, which indicates probably a wood-burning stove inside.
Which, of course, was brought with the Europeans. Now, in 1849, once Worcester was founded, how did life for the natives in the area change?
Well, it changed dramatically. And Jim had mentioned that the changes before this were rather gradual. So in archaeological terms, we think of this as a punctuated equilibrium, right? Something drastic happened, and that is the deforestation of this area, which caused a rapid decline in health for native people and plants and animals. And we've seen a significant change in the culture from one where the economy was based on egalitarianism and more of a gift-giving economy to one that was really based in capitalism. And so when we think about, you know, the place of Anishinaabe here, they were displaced.
And in the 175 years since Marquette became Marquette, has that changed for the better for the natives over the years? Has it gotten worse?
Well, it certainly got a lot worse before it got better.
Right.
Just recently in our history, we're starting to see much better relationships. We just attended a unveiling of sculpture down at the Lower Harbor Park that reflects the 7 grandfather teachings, the core values of Anishinaabe culture. You know, we're starting to see, we see a drum in the area, multiple drums, big drums. Spirituality is making a good comeback in the area. We have Native American studies on campus. You know, the city itself, Marquette, is really trying to repair relationships, recenter the identity of Marquette to what it was or could have been had we come together in a good way.
Dr. Martin Reinhardt, who is a retired professor of Native American Studies at Northern Michigan University, thanks for expanding our universe and sharing some of the stories of your people.
Miigwech, Jim.
Coming up after this, the famous names that help make Marquette, Marquette, on Marquette at 175.
This WZMQ 19 News Special, Marquette at 175, is sponsored in part by Northern Michigan University.
Okay.
Getting ready, we all have our routine. Finding an outfit. Fixing your hair. And all the other little touches. Gum, check. Keys, check. Phone, check. But of all the things you remember to bring with you, naloxone could be the most important. It can reverse an opioid overdose. You can get it without a prescription in most states, and it's really easy to use. If you or someone you know is at risk for opioid overdose, naloxone could save their life. Keep it on you and at home. For more information about naloxone, visit cdc.gov/stop-overdose.
This is a powerful place. In this chamber, decisions are made every day, decisions that impact your life, your friends, family, and neighbors. Your life can be changed by what happens here. I'm 19 News' Michigan Capitol correspondent Sophia Murphy. I report to you, tracking votes, new laws, and policies that change lives in the Upper Peninsula. The only place to see what's happening in Lansing is right here.
Sophia Murphy reports, only on WZMQ 19 News.
She's fair.
Untrue, Your Honor.
What, you're going to have your turn.
She's inquisitive.
What in the world led to this young lady finding you in this compromising situation?
And firm.
The only thing that matters in this particular courtroom, sir, is how I see it.
Watch Equal Justice with Judge Ebony K. Williams.
Weekdays on WZMQ CBS. Welcome back to Marquette at 175.
Now, Amos Harlow was not the only individual to come ashore in what eventually became Marquette in 1849. He was joined by several individuals, most of whom became civic leaders in their own right. And that's the third story we're going to tell tonight, the story of the famous names of Marquette. And when you're talking about the famous names of Marquette, you do have to start with Amos Harlow. In the summer of 1849, Harlow brought his wife Olive, daughter Ellen, and mother-in-law Martha to what was then Worcester. They set about building the first permanent structures in the settlement, a boarding house for workers and a sawmill for constructing the village. Ellen ran the boarding house, even setting up a garden to grow vegetables to feed the tenants. Meanwhile, Amos became Marquette's first postmaster, supervisor, and justice of the peace. And once the original Marquette Forge and Iron Company was sold to the Cleveland Iron Company, he devoted more time to city affairs, including laying out the street grid that's still in use. Amos Harlow died October 4th, 1890, at the age of 75. The person with whom Harlow stayed after landing in 1849, Charlie Caboggum, became a legendary figure in his own right. His wife, Charlotte, was the daughter of Majigisic, who had shown early explorers such as John Burt where Marquette County's iron ore deposits were situated. Majigisic was promised a share of the profits, but never received them. So Charlotte sued, won, and received a settlement. That case became the basis for John Volker's novel Laughing Whitefish. Charlie Caboggum moved out to Presque Isle once that area became developed and spent the rest of his life there. He died in 1902 at the age of 83. Now, Amos Harlow had brought two young men with him when he came ashore in 1849. The first was an 18-year-old named Peter White, who would do anything and everything asked of him. Legend has it that Peter White cut down the first tree in the city. He made 9 trips via sled dog to Green Bay the first 2 winters Marquette was around to get the mail because ships couldn't bring it in. He became Marquette County's first registrar of deeds, became a lawyer, opened a bank and an insurance company, was elected to both the State House and Senate, and was even asked by President Grover Cleveland to head the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which he turned down because he was too busy. For the first 60 years of Marquette's existence, he left his mark on the city, donating the land for Park Cemetery and the money for the library that now bears his name. He also went to Washington, D.C. to buy a piece of land from the federal government and then donated that land to the city for a park. When the city refused his donation because there was no way to get to the park, he had a road built out to the land, which was called Presque Isle, and it's been enjoyed by Marquette residents ever since. Peter White became one of the most influential individuals in the state of Michigan and remained so until he died in 1908. Now, Amos Harlow brought another young individual to Marquette with him, and that was Robert Graverette. Graverette had actually been to the area several times as a teenager, exploring the land for Mr. Harlow. And once Marquette became a city, he became the city's first lighthouse keeper and was also elected the first state representative for the entire UP down in Lansing. Graverette unfortunately died young at the age of 41, and while he can be considered one of Marquette's founding fathers, perhaps the family's greater legacy lies with his sister, Juliette. Juliette Graverette was 10 years younger than her brother Robert and ended up moving to what became Marquette early in her life. She married a local businessman named Samuel Kaufman, and the couple had 10 children, many of whom became business owners in their own right. But it was their son, Louis, who left the biggest mark. Buying what was then the First National Bank from Peter White started Louis Kaufman on a banking career that also saw him owning a bank in New York City, the Chatham National Bank, that became the first bank in the U.S. to have branches. After decades and several sales, that bank, by the way, is still around as J.P. Morgan Chase. Kaufman was also on the first board of directors when several small car companies merged, calling that new company General Motors. Kaufman also liked to construct buildings. When the First National Bank in Marquette needed extra space in 1927, he built what ended up being the most expensive building per square foot in the U.S. that year at the corner of Front and Washington. And several years later, he and several New York business friends, needing more office space in the city, built themselves a big one, which you can visit the next time you're there, because it's the Empire State Building. Louis Kaufman, bank owner and building builder, the nephew of City Father Robert Gray Barrett, died in 1942. Now, those founding fathers have left a legacy still with us today in the form of parks and streets, libraries, and businesses. But it does make you wonder, would those founding fathers recognize the city that they started in 1849? We'll find out in a very quick look at how Marquette has changed next in Marquette at 175.
Marquette is celebrating its 175th birthday, and things have changed. From a major shipping port that helped win the Civil War, transformed into today's beautiful scenery and treasured quality of life. Join Jim Koski for Marquette at 175. Discover history when Native peoples lived here 12,000 years ago. Marquette at 175. A TV-19 special brought to you by NMU. Christmas Day at 6 p.m. only on WZMQ TV-19.
It's Shunk's end of the year clearance. Save up to 60% off. Shop Shunk's at Marquette today.
January is Custom Month at Richardson Jewelers, downtown Marquette. Whether we're starting from scratch or recreating a new piece from some old or sentimental jewelry, we'll help you create your own one-of-a-kind perfect design. In January, we'll waive our $395 design fee. You imagine it, we'll create it. Custom Month at Richardson Jewelers, downtown Marquette.
Richardson Jewelers.
Yes, we're on thin ice. And everything is going up in smoke. Still, some are adding fuel to the fire, while the rest of us see the troubled waters rising. Our planet is under the weather. But when the going gets tough, the tough get, well, you know. Because in the heat of this moment, we're not about to lose our cool. Love it or lose it.
This is home for CBS WZMQ 19.
Welcome back to Marquette at 175.
Obviously, Marquette is not the same small port city it was in 1849. In fact, it's undergone several major changes in the past 175 years. But it's those changes and what prompted them that makes the city's history so fascinating. After its founding, Marquette grew rapidly for the next 20 years until it burned to the ground in the Great Fire of 1868. As the decades wore on, the new Marquette that grew from that fire eventually became the city we know and love today, filled with parks and classic buildings, over the years shifting its focus from being a shipping port to becoming the heart of Upper Michigan with education, medicine, and arts at its core. Those are but a few of the changes Marquette has seen in the past 175 years. And if it's changed that much since its founding in 1849, you kind of have to wonder what the next 175 years holds. Maybe we should get together in 2199 and find out. Happy Terquasquacentennial, Marquette. I'm Jim Koski. We hope you've enjoyed Marquette at 175.
This WZMQ 19 News Special, Marquette at 175, is sponsored in part by Northern Michigan University.
NCIS Sydney.
IFP.
We're hunting this terrorist while trying to recapture a stolen missile and solve a double homicide. You're enjoying this.
That obvious?
This is one of those moments where the Navy expects you to think outside the box. To have the guts to ignore history and trust your instinct.
I like that.
Oh, hi. I suppose you're wondering what an A-list celebrity like me is doing in a place like this. You must know, I'm saving the world. Oh, hi, Beth. Yep, saving the world again. Did you know that 40% of all the food produced in the United States is thrown away? That means everything that went into that food, the pesticides, the water, the land, was all for nothing. Just look at this perfectly good food thrown in the trash. The pizza with extra Cheerios, these goldfish and Band-Aid tacos. And just look at this perfect trash burger. This pasta dog looks delicious.
You don't have to dumpster dive like Ed Begley Jr. to save the planet. Fight food waste by shopping smart and using what you buy before it gets trashed.
That's way better. Ooh, arugula.
Do your part and find out other world-saving tips at betterthaned.org.
Direct.
Don't you ever look up at the sky and roll your eyes. You hear me?
Yes.
Realistic.
I will maybe have a tendency to
spend too much and won't be able to pay your rent.
He holds the line.
I resent it, and I resent you for doing it.
Mathis